Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. In this fireside chat session, we'll be touching on the basics of the Payment Services Act in Singapore and what to be aware of when applying for a payment services license. With me here is Mr. Vijay. He is a payment service subject matter specialist with Engineer Consultants. He has deep experience with the payment services industry, and prior to that, he spent quite a fair bit of time in the fund management space in Singapore. Thank you, Mr. Vijay, for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Faz.
Yeah, I just would like to start off with the Payment Services Act in Singapore, which was fairly recently passed. In the past few years, we've seen quite a slew of institutions applying for a license under the Payment Services Act. If I could start back at the basics for the benefit of our viewers with the first question, what are the payment services regulated under the Payment Service Act that requires a license?
Okay, so it's a good question. And as you rightly said, I think the Payment Service Act came into force from 28 Jan 2020. So it's fairly new, a few years into after it's come into force. So just to answer your question, it's a good starting point for us to get into the details of it. I think there are 7 broad categories that this particular act covers, the activities that it covers. One is basically the account issuance service. Second is a domestic money transfer. Third one is basically your cross-border money transfer. Then you have your merchant acquisition. Then have your e-money issuance. You have digital payment tokens, and finally you have the money changing services.
Thank you very much. That's quite a comprehensive list of activities, which nicely leads me into the next question. Are there different types of licenses that people need to be aware of? What are the types of licenses that a firm can apply for or under the Payment Services Act?
Okay. So there are 3 broad licenses or 3 types of licenses that are issued under the Payment Service Act. So let's carve out one, which is basically the money changing services, which is straightforward, where you go to a brick and mortar shop or you go to a money changer and you can exchange currency notes for whatever currency you want to buy or sell. So that's one type of activity which is basically licensed. The other 6 activities can be you can apply for license under 2 broad categories. One is the standard payment institution. The second one is basically your major payment institution.
Okay. What's the difference between the major payment services institution and the standard payments institution?
Okay. So how the regulators have come about with this is that basically whether you're a standard payment institution or a major payment institution is defined by the volumes that you basically transact. So if you're doing one activity out of the 6 activities, because money changing is not covered under this one. So and we should also keep out the e-money issuance because that is also not. So the remaining 5 activities which you have, which is basically your account issuance. Account issuance is an account issuance. Your domestic money transfer, your cross-border money transfer, merchant acquisition, DPT, and those 5 activities which are there. If you're doing any one of those activities and your monthly average volume is above 3 million, then you would have to apply for a major payment institution. If it's below that, you can apply for a standard payment institution. If you're doing more than 2 activities, let's say you're doing a domestic transfer and a cross-border money transfer activity, and your average monthly volume is above 6 million, you automatically have to apply for a major payment institution if your volumes are below that. So once you go to more than one activity, it's a combination of, irrespective of how many activities you do, if you cross the 6 million number, you got to apply for a major payment institution license.
Okay, so it's based on volume.
Volumes.
Okay.
And the last bit is basically if you're doing e-money issuance, the limit for that is that if your daily float, average daily float is above 5 million, then automatically you need to apply for a major payment institution. Okay. These are the basic defining factors which say that whether you should go for a standard payment institution or a major payment institution.
Okay, all right, thank you. So let's stick with the major payments institution, right? Maybe if you can give me a brief about what are the requirements to get a major payment institution license.
Okay, so some of the things, other than saying that people who are running the business should know what they're doing, their understanding of a payments business and how it operates. So knowledge, past experience is an important thing. So other than that, there are certain requirements that have been spelled out. in the regulations. I mean, of course, very clearly called out. So where is the fit and proper? So that's one of the basic starting points for a major payment institution. Second thing is your base capital requirements, which is basically saying how much capital you need to bring in, security deposit that you need to have in place, your basic AML controls that you need to put in place. In addition to that, you have to look at what sort of compliance arrangements that you have within the organization, given the size that you're dealing with. Is it your compliance team is geared to manage those things? Audit requirements, both internal and external. Have you identified what's your way of managing those requirements that are there? Technology risk requirements are also mentioned in the sort of the notices that have come along with that. So these are sort of the broad guidelines that you need to, or the sort of requirements that you need to meet when you're going in and applying for your major payment institution license.
Okay. Then next one, we lead into the next one. So after we applied for a major payment institution license, right? Are there any ongoing requirements for the major payment institution?
So if you look at it, I mean, I think in addition to saying meeting your base capital requirements, remaining fit and proper, having the right guys running the business, there are notices associated with the act. So some of the things which is basically saying PSN01, which is talks about AML requirement, AML safety requirements. Similarly, PSN02 is more focused towards DPTs. Then you have PSN03, which is basically your suspicious transaction reporting. 4, which is basically towards your reg reporting, which is regulatory reporting, which is required at certain frequency for different types of activities. Then you have PSN05, which talks about technology risk, which is also because most of the platforms run on technology, it's all web or mobile app based. That's a requirement that is there. Then you have cyber hygiene requirements, which have been clearly called out. Then you have your conduct requirements, which is being called out by the regulators again. So these are sort of ongoing requirements which you need to comply with.
Okay, thank you. So let me just take a step back into the license application phase. So if a firm would like to proceed with the license application, many of them actually have, right? Could you give any advice during this license application phase? In particular, while preparing the business plan for the license submission, what are the key areas that these applicants should, bear in mind when they prepare the business plan?
Okay, I mean, I think this is the most critical, and I think for anybody who's listening, I think one thing which I want to make it clear that while rest of the things in terms of the company structure, capital, all those things are pretty straightforward. I think most of the companies that I've seen have a challenge is when they come up with their business plan. So a couple of things which the regulator is looking for is saying that is there a clear understanding of what's their business model. So before we go into what are the requirements within the business plan, I think this is the most critical document that any financial institution that's aspiring to come into Singapore and trying to get a payment service license should focus on, because I think which is where bulk of the time is spent on. So one of the things, there are a few things that you need to cover in there. One of the things is to talk about your business model. What sort of products are you going to offer to the customers? The next thing that you need to also talk about is basically the channels of distribution. Are you going to be online? Are you going to be offline? Are you dealing with retail customers? Are you doing B2B? What's your business model and what's the value proposition that you're bringing to the market? So those are things that needs to be clearly coming out of the business plan. Now, that's the sort of the top level sort of things that we're talking about. Then the expectation is that when we go in with the business plan, we should also be able to articulate to the regulators saying that what are the process flows, what are the different levels of interaction, what are the controls that we are putting in place, whether it's for AML, whether it is for risk management, what are the controls that we are putting in place during the entire sort of the journey of a customer. So that's something that needs to be clearly brought out in the business plan. I think that's very important. And in addition to that, you need to talk about your org structure. What are the kind of people who are running the business? What's their experience? What's their background? Where do they come from? Why do we think that they are the most suited guys to basically run this function? So org structure in terms of people who are going to fill up key positions. So that's an important aspect that needs to be called out clearly. You might not have hired all those people, which is understandable because you're just going in for a license. But irrespective of that, at least identify those key positions that you intend to fill up once you get the license. The other very important component is on the compliance side. So what's your compliance structure going to be? It's not that we just want to show that the business side we are investing in, but in terms of controls, looking at complying with the regulations, we don't have enough things done there. So how do we then basically demonstrate to the regulator that you have proper compliance team, control functions who are basically monitoring the performance and complying with the regulations that are there. So that's an important piece which needs to be called out. Again, the experience of the people there. Now, here it's not mandatory that you have to have a team in Singapore and show that, no, we're building a full team here. You could also use resources within the group to basically say that there's enough experience as a collective team to fulfill some of this requirement. So those are things which clearly needs to come out in a business plan. In addition, to talk about basically what's the sort of expected volumes, what's your revenue going to be going forward in the years. So these are elements of the business plan that you need to focus on and make sure that you are transparent, you are clearly explaining to the regulators what are you here for, why are you applying for this license. Now, the other important thing that the regulators also expect in the business plan is that while you might not be doing certain activities today as you apply for the license, you might have certain future plans. So it's not that you are applying for only what you're doing now. You also need to have a section where you explain to them that while this is our starting point, in probably 6 months, 1 year, whatever is the time horizon that we're looking at, you would engage in certain other activities that you're trying to do. There are also people who have come into the payment industry who do certain other activities. So it's important to highlight, if you're holding any other licenses in Singapore, whether it's a capital market service license or any other sort of, if it's a lending related activities, you need to clearly mention it as part of your business plan and your document that you're submitting to the regulators.
Okay, thank you for that. So I take it that the business plan is really a key document. It's like providing the regulators clarity across all aspects, from business model, from your core competencies, and basically where you want to take the business to. Thank you very much for sharing. I hope you've given us some great pointers. So I hope the viewers can actually take some of the insights, and if they wish to apply for a license, they can then at least bear those in mind. We hope we have a good session today. Hope you guys got some good insights. Now, if you'd like to drop Vijay a question, right, please feel free to email him. You can drop him an email at our contact mailbox, contact@engineer-consultants.com, or you can visit our website, www.engineer-consultants.com. I'll leave all the details in the description below. So once again, thank you very much, Vijay. Thank you for sharing your experience with the regulators. Then I hope you guys join us for the next fire chat session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faz.
Thank you.